Hello, one and all, and welcome back to Retrospective. We're here for episode 3. We really start to roll around with these now. We're today joined by David Garrido from Sky Sports News, the man, the myth, the legend himself. How are you, David?
I'm very well, thank you. Yeah, coping okay, given the current situation. How are you guys doing?
Pretty decent, to be fair. Like, this is what we're doing with our lives. But Haas has got good acquaintance with David through La Liga Lowdown, which is quite cool. So that's how this came about. And I, of course, as you saw in one of our videos, I actually met David at Sky Sports News Studios, which was excellent myself. So that was good fun. Thank you very much for contributing to that, David.
No worries.
But yeah, Haas, just for any viewers that haven't been on before, seen this before, just explain the series for us.
So, Retrospective is it's kind of like an educational series in a sense. So it's like both educational for us as the interviewers and for the listeners or watchers that are tuning in. It's sort of like a way for us to kind of detail various sort of professionals throughout, not just the media industry, but various different paths as well. So we sit and we speak about their journeys into their respective sector. And then we also discuss, an interesting topic that maybe we discovered along the way or something we thought about before recording. So David, of course, Sky Sports News, it's massive in itself. Covers, so much ground. So tell us a bit more about that and, your sort of day-to-day thing at the current situation.
Yeah, listen, the day-to-day has changed massively, as you can imagine. The situation that we're in is, we hear this word a lot, unprecedented. And it truly is. I think unless you've lived through a world war, you've got no idea what this feels like. So this is new for all of us, and it's true for broadcasters as well. And it means that our output has changed hugely. We're still on air. We're still live. We're still live every day. But of course, there are fewer people in the building, which means that we can do fewer things and not to the same complexity, let's say, as we did before. Chris, you've been into our studios, you know what it looks like. Well, we're using a fraction of that. Normally, all of the newsroom can be and is live, whereas now we're kind of selecting bits of the studio to use and fewer cameras and obviously far fewer people simply in the building. Whereas before, I don't know sort of as an actual number, but I would imagine we probably have, about 100 to 125 people in the room, in the building that contribute to Sky Sports News. There's barely a dozen now. So, that's divided by a factor of 10. And it means that, obviously our output times is on tape. So we will record as we go live and then roll that out for a bit longer and then go live again. We're obviously doing a lot of remote recording and remote production as well. So, for example, we've started a new show this week with our top presenters and pundits called The Football Show between 9 and 11 a.m. And that involves people like Gary Neville, Jamie Carragher, Martin Tyler, David Jones, Kelly Cates. So sort of the leading lights of Sky Sports presenting and punditry, and they're all presenting from their own homes. So it's very different. You've seen these sort of watch-alongs as well. That's the way things are right now. I think we're lucky in a way that the technology exists for us to create other kinds of output, very very much like this. And it's not just a domain of Sky to do that. Anyone can be a creator. And we're now really seeing the creativity come to life. So it is very different. And I'm sure, there'll be such relief when we come back to what is more normal circumstances. And we can just be, once again, the bastion at the forefront of sports news and sports journalism.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's sort of a time where, we wouldn't expect it to happen. Like, everyone has to stay away from each other, and it just complicates everything more than anything. But we usually start with this question, and we'll go with this again. What was your first memory of really wanting to be in the media?
Well, I did a little bit of writing when I was in sixth form, and so creative writing, but also articles, sports-related things. And I enjoyed it. I don't think I knew at that point, but it gave me a little taste of it. I do remember the first time that I was ever on air, and that was at my student radio station when I was at university. And it was the station called Oxygen FM. And I remember when I was doing my interview for my uni, the guy who was sort of like chaperoning a lot of the students around, his name was Barry. And Barry was I think he was like a science student of some sort. And he, in his spare time, did this student radio thing called Oxygen FM. And he said to me, listen, if you get in, check it out at Freshers Fair. It's, I really love it. It's probably, one of the best things I've done. And it's always occurred to me that if it hadn't been Barry and it hadn't been someone who'd done student radio, maybe I would never have found it. But I followed his advice, went to Freshers Fair, found Oxygen FM. And then they asked me, well, what do you like doing? What do you know about? And I said, well, I love sport, but, I wouldn't say that I'm an expert on it, whatever. And so they invited me in to be part of their Saturday afternoon show called Touchline. And I was, at that point, just kind of like, just literally walking into the station, and they said, right, okay, let's write a bulletin. So I started to write something, and they were helping me through with it. And they said, well, do you want to go and read it then? And I didn't realize that meant actually live on the radio, even though obviously it's a radio station, it's a Saturday afternoon show, it's obviously live, but that hadn't really clicked in my head. And then when I did it, there was something that did click in my head that said, I really like this, and somehow innately I get it. And I get what this is meant to be. And it got me so hooked. And I remember that vividly. And from that moment on, I think there was this kind of need to sort of scratch that itch and follow that path. And it meant that my uni experience actually was very different to what it could have been, because I wasn't always sort of out in the pubs and the bars. I wasn't always, doing, everything else that normal students do. Even my love of sport to play it, took a little bit of a hit, because I had to, I wanted to be in the radio station. So that was that first kind of seminal moment, I guess, when the seed was planted. And then I just decided to keep following it. And then ultimately, I guess that must have added up to where I am now. Yeah.
So when you first sort of wanted to go into the media, and when obviously all this happened for you, were you always looking, because you are a big Spanish football fan yourself, were you ever always looking to specialise into that?
No, not at all. When I was at student radio, I did a lot of different things. We did a lot of football, but we did a lot of motorsport. I mean, I was in Oxfordshire, it's a big motorsport hotbed. A lot of the Formula One teams are located there or near there. There's Silverstone, which is just down the road. And it's probably the first major event I ever covered was the British Grand Prix in 1999. Oh my God, it was last century, it's mad. And like half a lifetime ago. So I remember getting into F1 particularly. I remember doing a lot of tennis when I was younger, and there was other bits of work that I started doing once I just got some hours under my belt. And I did some tennis events, and I even went abroad. The first event that I did abroad was in, I think it was I want to say Dusseldorf or somewhere. And again, it was 99, 2000. So very, very early days. And I was doing lots of different sports. And I've always been into lots of different sports. I remember watching Wimbledon with my mum when I was younger. I remember there are some videotapes that exist, although if I ever find them, I will destroy them, of me commentating on nothing, on my imagination, if you like, but it's a Formula One race. So I'm sort of doing my own version of, well, I suppose it would now be David Croft or Crofty, but it was in the day, Murray Walker. So I did do a lot of different things, but the thing is that my family are Colombian. That's where both my parents are from, both born and raised there. And I speak Spanish, and I've always loved Spanish football. So it's not like it was a designed aim or path from the start, but it's something that if the opportunity arose to express that, then I would obviously take it. And that did arise. It came much, much later in sort of the mid-20-teens. But, sometimes, things don't necessarily happen in the order that you want them to. But, I'm very fortunate with what, the other things that I have done. I did a lot of F1, both at the BBC, before then joining Sky, and then at Sky. I've covered a lot of events. I've interviewed a lot of people, of such sporting greatness. And I can't ever, fault that or complain about it. I think it's, part of the richness of a career that you're able to do a lot of different things. And I think it's important to, actually. I don't think necessarily you should just pigeonhole yourself as one thing. I've been lucky that over the course of my, 21, almost 22 years doing this, that I've been able to explore lots of different areas. And the job that I do on Sky Sports News requires me to know not just football and not just Spanish football, but if a story breaks in rugby union or in, cycling, I've got to be able to deal with that quickly and adeptly and manage to at least buy myself some time, if it's not one of my favorite sports, to find out the information so that I can then develop that story. So, you know, you need to be a bit of an all-rounder in the job that I do. So I think that it was important in a way that early on I got exposure to those other sports and ended up loving them as well.
So obviously, you know, you had university and like sort of went to the traditional pathway of doing a degree and all that sort of thing. So are there any sort of like particular moments or experiences sort of around that time or not long after that really stood out to you that made you sort of form certain skill sets maybe, or something along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think I mentioned the British Grand Prix in '99. I covered it in 2000 as well for my student radio station. So I was there in a media centre at a Grand Prix circuit, you know, one of the most famous circuits in the world, Silverstone, with all these professionals. And I think what that made me realise was, whoa, hang on a minute. I'm now in a different environment. I'm not just in the radio station with a bunch of students or other people. These are, you know, some of the leading lights journalistically and for there, whether it was for print, whether it was for radio, whether it was TV. And I'm mixing with them. And I've got to fix up, look sharp and look like I belong and act in that way and deliver the highest quality of work that I could. And you know, I think that's it was an early experience of that made me go, right, not only do I need to be like that when I'm in this situation, but boy, do I want to be in this situation. And, you know, it makes you even hungrier for it once you get a taste of it like that. After that, I started freelancing a little bit. And I say that very loosely. I was still at university, so it wasn't like I was earning a living fully, and I wasn't really earning much anyway. It was more just getting lots of different experience. I worked for the BBC in the sort of local area, local radio. I remember doing, there was some really kind of like difficult moments. So for example, I remember I worked for BBC Radio Berkshire because they're not far from where I live. And over the Boxing Day sort of program, they had Reading to start off with, the Royals, the football team. And then the second part of that, they wanted to do some ice hockey with the Bracknell Bees. And they wanted me to commentate on that. And I'd never commentated on that ever in my life. And so I needed to go and get like a VHS of ice hockey with commentary on it so that I could listen to it and understand what it was like. And it made me realize, my goodness, how difficult commentary is. One is just the speed of the game in terms of ice hockey. Secondly, like player identification, you know, if you can't quite see the number on the shirt or if they don't have a name or whatever. And I then had to try and carry that for, God, it must have felt like years when I did it on the airwaves on that Boxing Day afternoon. And so, you know, I think the experiences that I was having were really formative because they just gave me an idea of, well, this is great, but my God, if you're going to be good at this, you've got to work hard. But the two things went together really well because the one led to the other. You work hard, you make sure you do your prep, you do your research, and you hold your nerve in those situations, you will eventually get there. And the prize was there. Like I could see, you know, I could host this or I could do that. So that was one of the main things. But I'd say that the biggest experience I had probably around that time was a campaign called BBC Talent. Now, BBC Talent, I would describe as basically, if you think of X Factor these days, maybe like a broadcaster's version of it, but like really, really, really poor man's version of it. It's not like it's terrible. It's not like it's awful, but it was just, you know, a lot more lo-fi than what you see now with X Factor. But the same thing applied in the sense that it was a competition. You whittle down the numbers, and at the end there's a contract. And it might not be with Psycho Records, but it was with BBC Sport. Now, honestly, guys, to this day, I still don't know how or why, but I ended up entering that campaign. I remember my mum saw like a leaflet for it in, I think it was like W.H. Smith or something. And then I entered it and went through the rounds. And again, I don't know how or why, but I ended up winning it. And the prize was at the time, a 6-month contract with BBC Sport. So I was at university and I was, 20? I was 19 or 20 when it happened. And I knew that basically I had a 6-month contract that I could take up with the BBC, but I was still at university. So I finished my degree. The BBC were great. They said, look, we don't want to interfere with your education. Just finish that, get it done, and then you can start the contract afterwards. So that's how I did. That was my springboard, if you like. That's how I got from student radio, a bit of local TV into working for the BBC in London. So that whole campaign and that whole experience was a real godsend for me, I suppose, but also a real test, because I was up against other people. I think there were like 1,500 people in the category to start off with, who originally applied for it. But then they whittled the numbers down through regional auditions, semi-finals at the Television Centre, a final sort of like night, and then that was that. But yeah, it was a long old time ago now. But I can't help but think that was super important for me at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine there's not really things like that nowadays in the same sense either. Nothing even remotely similar. You do see the odd competition and things like that, but it's geared up so differently coming out of university with apprenticeships and grad schemes and sort of work placements and that sort of thing. I remember we discussed this on the previous episode with Ryan Conway, and we were saying, do you feel like it's easier to break into the industry now than it was even 10 years ago, I'd say?
Listen, I think it's probably a little bit more complicated, because when I was breaking into the industry, let's put it this way, digital media, that involves like TV being digital, so Freeview, etc., wasn't even a thing. Forget social media, no one had even thought that up. And there are so many more levels to this, which means that there are more opportunities, but it also means there are more people and there's more competition. And also, I sense that the skill set of people trying to get into the industry now is probably higher and more complicated. You know, for me, I needed to know how to write, needed to know how to broadcast, needed to know how to produce, but I didn't have to do it on 14 different platforms. You know, it feels like this era right now, if you've just got a blog, that's nowhere near enough. You've got to be able to do social media. You've got to be able to do podcasts. You've got to be able to do video content, YouTube. You've got to be able to, write. It's all sorts of different things. Now, within all that, I still feel, and it's my passionate viewpoint, that you've got to mark yourself out as different, because everyone is doing that kind of thing. So what's your X factor? What's that thing that makes you sit on the yes pile because you've got this special thing that only really applies to you? That's how I would tackle it now. Is trying to pick a smart strategy, trying to make yourself stand out for the right reasons. And every time that there's an opportunity to pick up experience, that you think about, what is your dream job? Who is it that does it? What is it that they do really, really well? What are the skills that they absolutely master and perfect? And then every bit of experience that you have has to go in some way towards reinforcing those skills. And if you sort of look at the graph, that arc, every single point on it, I feel you need to think about that opportunity and go, hang on a minute. If I'm running around doing 2 weeks work experience at MTV or whatever, is that going to reinforce the skills I need to be the next Gary Lineker? Probably not. In which case, sack off 2 weeks at MTV and do that one day at my local radio station, where I might learn how to present, or I might learn how to read a script, or I might learn how to do an interview, or I might learn how to do some football analysis. Because that's what I really believe it's about. It's about honing skills. I feel that there's a lot of content out there, and there's lots of people doing lots of great creative things, but it's honing the skills that is really important, because it's only if you're one of the very best practitioners of your chosen, whatever it is, if it's a commentator, a presenter, whatever, that I think you will be able to get that job. But you be smart about it. Try and find those bits of experience that will absolutely reinforce the skill set that you want to have at that level, and then I reckon you've got a much better chance of getting there. And I think that when you've got a much more convoluted, congested battleground like it is right now, because everyone wants to do these kind of jobs. They're great jobs. I remember when I was at Radio 1 covering an Ashes series, a British Grand Prix, a Wimbledon Championships, a European Championships, Champions League finals, World Cups. People said to me, "You've got the dream job," and it's true. I did, and I still do now. It's just that I think that right now, if you're trying to get into the industry, you've got a bit of a tougher battle. There are more opportunities out there, but if you want to get what you really, really want to get, I believe that you've got to be smart about it. You've got to be savvy about it. Hard work will get you part of the way there, but have a strategy and know what you want and figure out the best way of going about getting it. And that's what I personally think is not a bad strategy to have.
Yeah, when you talk about X Factor, I was like, "Has Karim, you're my X Factor, mate."
I'm touched.
I tell you what, some of those thumbnails, crikey, mate, Jesus. But, yeah, you talked about having skills in multiple sort of areas nowadays, more than ever before. Did you ever see, when you started writing, obviously, and then you went into radio and then TV, which would you say is, well, your favourite? And more like, what do you enjoy doing the most, but secondly think you're best at?
Well, it's changed, and it's a dynamic picture. I started off writing because that was the only thing that I sort of had a vague idea of how to do. It's not like I was sort of had a microphone at home and broadcast. It's, you know, so it's the one thing you can all do, right? Everyone can pick up a pen or tap away on a laptop or something. So that started off, and then I spent a long time in radio. I spent from 1998 when I started student radio to 2011 when I joined Sky, and in between times, a lot of time at the BBC. And the BBC was a fantastic, not just a training ground, but they formed me as a broadcaster, and I owe a lot to them in terms of my career. And I have a great affinity for radio. I think it's one of the most wonderful media there is. I feel that it's such a unique way of conversing with your audience. And it really is that. It's conversing and it's talking like this. And I think there's a certain beauty about it. And it's very, yeah, again, it's very tough to master. Not everyone can just do it just by chatting on the radio. I think that has stood the test of time. I think when we went digital with TV, everyone predicted that it would be the death of radio, and it's proven not to be, because what do? They put those radio stations on your Freeview box. And it's the thing, you know, if you need your eyes for something else, you can still listen to the radio, whereas you can't necessarily watch the TV. So I for a long time felt that radio was my home. But the BBC Talent campaign was a TV thing. And so at some point early on, I had an ability to do that. I'd say that I do love TV and radio equally, if you want to call them that, in this kind of analog kind of way. I suppose you would say, you know, visual content and audio content or whatever. But I listen to a lot of podcasts, and you know, I love, you know, those. I think that they complement each other. And I don't want to sit on the fence with my answer, but I do really believe, you know, there's sometimes that I really love the visual medium. I love the intimacy of radio and how immediate it can be as well. So the skill sets that you need are related. They're not so distinct that one can't apply to the other. You just have to mold it slightly. You have to flip it a little bit and be agile with how you are on air. I still feel though that, you know, the two can absolutely sit together, and that's why some of the best broadcasters in the world are both on the radio and on the TV. You know, Claire Balding isn't just a TV broadcaster. She also does things like 5 Live. You know, one of my favorite broadcasters back in the day was a guy called Ian Payne, who was on BBC Radio 5 Live for a long time. And even before then, on Radio 2, when they would do sport, you know, in depth on Radio 2. And he's the guy who I used to listen to in my youth. And I do really believe that the best broadcasters can sit on many platforms, because they sense the differences and the distinctions between them, and can apply one thing to one and one thing to another. And you know, I don't have a preference as such. I think that TV's where I am now, and I really love it. But if someone said to me, look, we've got a great radio opportunity or a podcast opportunity, of course I would listen to it, because I've got a lot of love for that medium too.
Absolutely. So you two know each other for a little while now, doing some stuff on a project. So being sort of new to it, I've watched a few of the stuff, but a few of the things on there. But explain to me La Liga Lowdown, David.
Okay, well, it's when I started presenting La Liga in 2016. Sky had the rights, and they had 2 years left on the rights. Obviously, these things are done in tenders and sort of different cycles, and for most it's three years. That's how it works with the Premier League, with the Champions League, with La Liga as well. So we'd done 1 year and we had 2 years left, and I was brought in to do those seasons. I noticed in our second season we sort of pared back our coverage of Spanish football for a number of different reasons, and we did less in the studio. We still showed the games, but we didn't do, some of them were behind the red button and other things. then what happened was the rights went away, and they went to 11 Sports and now ultimately Premier Sports, who are based in Ireland, and they have La Liga TV as well. So I sensed that things were changing. And just as we were losing the rights, I was thinking about how I would continue to be involved with Spanish football, because, I mean, as you mentioned before, Chris, it's something that I've always been connected to, never always had the opportunity to express it, but then I finally had that. I didn't want to just suddenly lose it. I need to keep up my own visibility with it. And so I started thinking about, well, what do I do? How do I continue this on? So I started thinking about, well, could I contribute for other people like Marca, a big Spanish Madrid-based sports paper, or could I, do some other bits of creation? And then eventually I thought, hang on a minute, we have all the tools here in the modern day, as it was sort of 2018 by that point, to create something of our own. But hang on a minute, I'm based in London and I can't possibly do this justice on my own. I can probably lead it, I can probably manage it, direct it, and I can broadcast with it, but I need some feet on the ground. And so I decided to look around the Spanish football space, and luckily that's quite easy now with social media. You can pretty much find anyone you want. Most of them have a profile on social media, very few of them don't. And, there was some real leading lights out there. There's people like Guillaume Balaguer, there's people like Sid Lowe, there's people like Graham Hunter, people who are known for being associated with Spanish football, a lot of them because of working with Sky on La Liga that we had for 20 odd years. But I didn't want to go for them because, one, this project was too small for them. And two, actually what I wanted to find was the next level of them and say, okay, well, those guys are already established, but who's going to replace them? Who's going to succeed them? And so I managed to find some people, and they became my original squad. And we decided to launch this content hub on several different platforms and try and maintain the content week to week over the course of a season. We launched in March 2018, and I knew a few people in Spanish football as in former footballers. So we launched with an interview with Luis Garcia, the former Liverpool player, as I'm sure you'll know well. Yeah, ghost goal and all of that. And so I managed to chat to Lucho and say, listen, can we do a little interview? It would really help us launch well, with kudos, with credibility, because we've got that contact. And the next match day was Barcelona against Atletico anyway, and he played for both teams. It fitted really well. And then, we started sort of building the content from there, and we had a lot of interviews, but we also had, the regular diet of stuff you see on our social media. We had our podcasts. We also had a YouTube channel at that point too. And it was, as I say, just to try and keep up the visibility in Spanish football, but also not so much for my sake, but to do something a bit different, almost like a sort of a one-stop shop, because there was lots of people who did just one thing. So there might be a podcast, or there might be a Twitter feed, or there might be a website, but there wasn't somewhere that you had all of those things in one. So we decided to do that to start off with, and then it sort of evolved, and we realized that actually Twitter and the podcast were the highest performers of those networks that we were on, and we decided to stick with that and consolidate. So we sort of wound back in terms of number of platforms, but we really fixed on those. And I think it was probably the right decision, because otherwise we would have spread ourselves too thinly. It's not like, I've got millions of pounds to plug into this. This is all just my own money, and just trying to fund it as best I can. And so we've just carried on. So now we're in season 3. So we ran March to June 2018. And then we said, right, okay, this works. We can carry on. So we did a full season. And now, of course, we've got into the 19-20 season, and, we're still going, and we're still trying to create content. And, it's obviously very difficult for all broadcasters and creators out there when there's nothing actually on the field of play to talk about. So, we're having to try and find other ways. So we're looking at nostalgia, we're looking at different angles, we're looking at different personalities, we're looking at different clubs. And actually that's working. And we've noticed from the analytics that we've had a little pickup since then, even though nothing else is going on the pitch. So that's where we are with La Liga Lowdown. And I'm really proud of it. I think, I've taken a step back from it in terms of being on air with it, if you like, because I've got a little baby. I've got Leo, who's 6-7 months old, and I've got to be at home more and make sure that I perform the roles that I think are most important as a father, as a husband. But also, it's another important step for me to evolve it and let other people take more responsibility. So we have Ewan McTeer, who hosts our podcast now, who's very, very good. He's written books on Eibar and Atletico Madrid. We've got the other members of the main sort of heart of the team who were there before from the start and who contribute to the pods. We've now got a real thriving, varied social media group, which is great because we've got lots of different viewpoints. We've got different ages, different perceptions of the game. And, you know, that mix really makes what we do on the social media side of things varied too. And we've got the website now as well, which was a decision that, you know, I came to with the group because everyone wanted to write. Most people wanted to write. And so we said, okay, all right, well, let's give you the platform to do that. So we decided to make a website. And now we've got, you know, people like Hass and the rest of the group all contributing. So that's the kind of evolution of La Liga Lowdown. And I'm really, as I say, I'm very proud of it because, you know, most things like this, startups maybe just don't last. But also, I'm just really proud mostly of the personal progress that I've seen in the group. So everyone involved, and there's 9 of us as a core group, and then other people that we have outside that. Everyone in that whole extended family has improved. And that's what this is, you know, also about. It's about honing your skill set. And I've always said it's part of the deal. If you're part of La Liga Lowdown, you have access to me and my 20 odd years of experience, and I can help you. And, you know, it's going to be, hopefully for those people involved, a nice thing to look back on when they're older to say, hey, I got involved with that. It was definitely worth it. It taught me all this sort of stuff. And now look where I am. And hopefully it will help, you know, just start that progress for those people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, finding opportunities with established names in the industry is not the easiest thing to do. I mean, I feel like probably more so, you know, than lately and in other sectors, you have to sort of really graft to get those established launch pads. I mean, I've been quite lucky through university with yourself and people like Football Daily who really sort of helped me get on the ladder with that. Because when I first stepped into it, I had no idea what I was doing. I kind of jumped into journalism as really sort of a leap of faith, as a last minute sort of thing. I was looking for something to do as a degree. Wasn't sure what to jump on. So I thought, well, I enjoy writing for blogs, and that's all I wanted to do at the time. And as I've sort of stepped through it, gone through university, and obviously met yourself and through the guys at Football Daily, I found a taste for other things. So obviously, you know, I managed to shape, you know, with Photoshop, doing this sort of stuff as well.
Yeah.
So as you know, it's sort of living proof.
And listen, I think you guys, and I hope you sort of take this in the spirit in which it's meant. It's not a condescending thing. It's more just a knowledge of what it's like from having been there, because I was there in 98, 99, learning what I needed to learn, but also just, and this is the most important thing, painting the landscape. And that's the best way I can put it is, you know, it's like there's this sort of invisible map, but you don't quite know what it looks. And you need to spend a bit of time painting out the different parts of it so that you know what the landscape looks like, but with the knowledge that landscape changes as well. So what you looked at 2-3 years ago maybe actually looks slightly different 3, 4, 5 years on. So yeah, I'd say that, you know, that's really important. You say you sort of fell into journalism a little bit, but it's actually part of the journey to just investigate a little bit, have a little explore, and see what these things are like when you try them out. And there's bits you will like, there's bits you won't like. It's really important, and it's also really gratifying. It's one of the best bits. I wish I could have the same freedom. I obviously just don't. But you know, that's what comes right at the start. It's the excitement of it when you're starting out, going, right, this is new world that I'm just embarking on my journey into. What does it look like? How do I feel about that? And how does that change and evolve over time? And it's one of the most satisfying experiences ever.
So if you were to sort of cast your mind back to when you first stepped into it and compare sort of all the stuff you've done, so obviously, you know, you've done stuff with the BBC, you did the show on Sky with Gilliam and the other guys with Revista, you had that.
Yeah.
You know, you've done the World Football Summit as well, which we actually not touched on.
Yeah.
You've done, you know, a hell of a lot in that 20 plus years. So if you were to sort of speak to yourself when you first broke into it, would you say you've achieved everything you wanted to? Is there still things you want to do?
Oh no, there are still things I want to do. I think though, what happens is that as you sort of go through it, and certainly when you get to my age, if you like, there are other things that take over. And it's not for me to say that I'm being unambitious. It's more just that there are things in life that are more important for me right now, and that will continue to be from here, which is my family. But I still have a huge amount of ambition in what I want to do. And I think luckily, as I say, you know, the tools are there for people to design these things. You know, I'm not saying that I can create the next Facebook, but, you know, there was a bunch of people who got together in 2007, I think. Was it longer than that? I think it might. No, it was about 2007. And they invented a podcast called The Football Ramble. And it then became, eventually, over that time, one of the biggest football podcasts there is in this country anyway, along with the Totally Football and Guardian Football Weekly. But it was self-made. It's these 4 dudes who came together, and who's to say that can't happen again now? So, if I could do that, I'm sure that anyone could do that. If I look back and think of the things that were the most, satisfying, those moments, I think a lot of them happened when I was at Radio 1. So I remember early on, I covered Federer's first Wimbledon win. That was quite significant. Obviously, it's his first Grand Slam as well. So, he's won 20. So, that was nice. England winning the Ashes in 2005. For the cricket fans out there, arguably the best Ashes series played. Well, certainly, I mean, it's one of those. I remember my girlfriend at the time, after the second test, which was what arguably the most dramatic. England won by 2 runs, and it looked like Australia might nick it. And had they won that, they would have gone 2-0 up in the series. And instead, England won it. It was 1-1. And it was pivotal, absolutely huge turning point in the series. And I remember coming back home after the 4 days there, because it finished on the 4th day. And my girlfriend at the time asked me, "So, well, what's this Ashes stuff? Everyone's talking about it." I was there going, "Wow, we've managed to penetrate through to the general consciousness so much that even my girlfriend, who didn't give monkeys about cricket, was asking me about it." And the only way I could really sum it up is, look, I can't explain all the rules of the game right now, but this match in total had over 1,000 runs scored in it, and the difference was 2. That's how it was decided. That's how close it was. And the thing was that at the end of the game, you could only have either one side winning or the other side winning. You couldn't. It couldn't finish in a draw. We still had another day left if we needed to. There's no way that you would have just had no runs for a day and then it would have just stayed on the same score. It would have been either the wicket fell or the run was scored and one side won or the other side won. And it's very rare that you get that in sport, especially a sport that lasts, as I say, up to 5 days, where you have 6 hours of play a day and breaks for lunch and tea. It's very rare you can maintain that level of drama. So that's why that series was so important and so special to me. What else do I remember? I think, covering major football tournaments was huge. Unfortunately, well, I say unfortunately, I'm an England fan in the sense that I live in this country, I was brought up in this country.
Yeah.
But if I had my way, I'd support Colombia. And in that penalty shootout in 2018, I was supporting Colombia. So, I was the one who suffered then at that point. But I'd seen England go out on penalties in 2004 in the Euros, in 2006 at the World Cup, both to Portugal. I remember also being in Bloemfontein in 2010 when England lost to Germany in the second round. With the Lampard goal that wasn't a goal. So I've seen a fair bit of agony as far as football tournaments are concerned. But equally, the first All British Champions, the first All English Champions League final in 2008 between Chelsea and Manchester United in Moscow. I mean, we were taking penalties at 1:05 in the morning in Russia because the game had started at 10:45 because it had to be on air at 7:45 on British time. So, these are incredible memories. Most of them have come through events that I've covered. But I've also been very lucky. I've interviewed some amazing people across the world of sport. So Beckham, Rooney, Ronaldo, certainly in that era when I was at Radio 1, you could get access to those people. Hamilton, Serena Williams. I've been very fortunate with the people that I've been managed to, even if it's just for 5 minutes, get a chat with and record that for broadcast and it to go on air. And plenty more since I've arrived at Sky 2. And then other things, I think personal projects, again, it's stuff that's of your own creation. I did a documentary in 2014 on the Gibraltar national football team, which was a really quirky project, different project. This is essentially a team of amateur footballers who were playing international football, and they were in a Euro qualifying group with the likes of Germany, who at the time were world champions, remember? They just won the World Cup in 2014. Yeah. Ireland, Scotland, who else was in that group? Georgia and Poland. So not an easy group. And there's little Gibraltar trying to mix it with these guys. And obviously they lost every game, and obviously they got destroyed. But there were some amazing moments. They scored at Hampden Park the first ever competitive goal, which was against Scotland, to equalise the game at the time, which was amazing. And the manager at the time was Scottish, which I thought was just brilliant because he had to sing both national anthems and he wanted to kill his home nation. Special. Yeah, so lots of moments like that. And I've, as I say, I've just been really fortunate to have those those opportunities to cover those events, to interview those people, to do those projects. But I don't think at the age of 39 that ends. I'm hoping that there'll be more besides. And sometimes, as you say, I mean, you mentioned World Football Summit. They don't just come courtesy of my main day job, Sky or the BBC before, but other clients that I have. And with World Football Summit, I hosted a La Liga Legends panel. And on this panel was Christian Karim, Fernando Morientes, there was Gaisca Mendieta, there was, who else was there? Fernando Sanz, there was a couple of others as well. And it was just like a, not like a who's who, but just a really...
It's big, yeah.
High level list, yeah. I mean, Gaisca is one of my favourite footballers, obviously.
I was going to say,
Being there for a decade, there or thereabouts. But Morientes was also there, but he was also with Madrid, he was also with Liverpool. Christian Karim, obviously, with Madrid. So, a lot of amazing people to speak to, and sharing a stage with them and having just an open, 45-minute chat with them. It basically anything being, if you like, in the game, you could ask really about anything, and it was my job to manage that, and yeah, it was great. So there's been a lot of fun memories, but hopefully a lot more that I can still create in the future.
Yeah. But with scenarios like that, I mean, I'm still obviously formatively only attending events in the last couple of years. A couple of boxing ones, a couple of MMA ones, and obviously the odd football one here and there. Obviously, as someone who's far more established, do you still get starstruck in these situations? Because obviously, I mean, whenever I speak to my friends, they're like, "I can't believe you saw this person. I can't believe you saw that. Or can't believe you were there." I mean, even when I went to the Wolves game for the Liga Lowdown, I didn't even notice at first, but I was sat next to Gillian Balaguer. I had no idea until I turned around. I was like, "Oh my God, there's Gillian Balaguer."
Yeah. I know what you mean. I think I've never been starstruck, but that's probably because I was lucky, a bit like you, that I had those early experiences where I just kind of just absorbed it and sucked it up and went, right, okay. I want to be here on merit, and I want to be here regularly. And if so, I've got to fix up and look sharp, like I said. And it meant sometimes you've got to really just hold your nerve. Now, it doesn't mean that I don't get nerves, but I know how to control them and manage them. And if you meet someone who is a true great, obviously there's going to be that feeling inside you of, you want to absolutely nail this. But then I think of it this way: they're a professional in what they do, and I'm a professional in what I do. And you've got to earn their respect by doing the best job you can. And that doesn't mean just, giggling and
asking for their autograph.
You've got to do your job first and foremost.
Yeah, for sure.
And, if I were to, I mean, there's a number of people who obviously I haven't ever interviewed. So if I had to interview, I don't know, Sir Alex Ferguson or Mourinho or let me think, who else? Federer, who's one of my favourite sportsmen ever. I've sadly never spoken to Roger Federer, but I wish I could, and I'm sure I would, jump at the opportunity. And if I had that opportunity, I would treat it as every single other one that I've done in my life, which is, you've got to earn the right and do it properly. And, then you earn their respect, and that's a much more equal exchange, and you're going to get a much better outcome. Of course, there's only... You're going to feel those, as I say, those nerves. People ask if I ever get nervous. I wouldn't say I get nervous, but I do feel nerves, and that's healthy. And I think you need to just find the way to channel those nerves at the right time. I remember hosting my it was my second Clásico, and it was the 2-3 at the Bernabeu when Messi scored in. Yeah,
remember that game all too well. It still hurts.
Yeah. I mean, what a game! I mean, I thought when James scored the second, it was done.
Yeah, so did I.
I thought this is the league done. This is everything done. Colombian scores. Whoop, whoop, whoop. But then, what happened after that, and I felt the need once Rob Palmer had wrapped up on the commentary. He's sort of he's doing his final little wrap up. You can see the pictures. The Madrid players are sat on, they're on their haunches. They're sat on the ground. The Barca players are celebrating. He's wrapping up, and he always wraps up with the score. It's finished here. Real Madrid 2, Barcelona 3. I felt the nerves there to add to what he'd done, not duplicate it, not just sort of, say something that's just nonsensical. And, I really felt the nerves in that moment. But I felt, it was one of my proudest moments to host, a Clásico which had 1 million viewers on Sky, which is a big audience for Spanish football on Sky.
Huge, yeah.
And to have that drama and that that incredible, the significance and the magnitude of that game, it was huge. If Barcelona, if Real Madrid had won it, it would have been game over.
It was,
Barcelona won, and then they went level on points and they had the better head-to-head. Now, after that, Madrid held out and won the title. But even so, at the time, it was such a pivotal result, such a pivotal game. I really felt it in that moment. I was there thinking, right, okay, Rob is doing a great job. He's just giving the proper Rob Palmer treatment. It's sounding great, but I need to match that. I've got to, these guys are seasoned professionals. Rob has been commentating on La Liga since we started it on Sky. That's 20 odd years. And here's me in my rookie season as a presenter on La Liga, having to, to reach the same levels. So hopefully I did that. And hopefully, it passed off okay. So, you still get those moments, whether you're, 20, 23, 26, 29, or 39. So, that's how it should be, though. That's how broadcasting is and how it should be.
Yeah.
So, no, definitely.
Sorry, mate.
No, Karim. I was just agreeing.
We always do this. Anyway, moving on. So I'm going to ask you more about sort of the general football world now. So as a La Liga fan, obviously you've had access to players who've done well in Spain and then been hyped up, come to England and then sort of fell off a little bit. And one I can immediately think of is Iago Aspas. What when you see that, and you obviously you get bigger access to Spanish football than some of us, because and being an expert in it. Have there been any players that you've been really, really excited about, and then when they've come over here, they've just let it down a little bit?
Oh, do you know what? As a Sheffield Wednesday fan, we signed a player from Barcelona B called Rodri, and he was great to start off with. Scored bunch of times in pre-season as well, and then got homesick, and then he just kind of fell off a cliff. So he's the one I've always thought, oh man, whatever happened to Rodri? Look, I think there are certain players who, once they've returned to Spanish football, they've re-established their value. You talk about Iago Aspas. Well, he basically saved Celta Vigo from relegation last season. Single-handedly. They were 2-0 down against Villarreal at home. Had they lost that game, ultimately they probably would have gone down. But they mounted a comeback. I think he scored 2 of the 3 goals, and they won that game. And they managed to make Balaidos, their home ground, an utter fortress. And people now really realise what he's good at. Now, I think at Liverpool you never really saw the true Iago Aspas, and that could have been down to a number of different reasons. But it wasn't so long ago that you had a bunch of Spaniards who did really, really well under a Spanish manager. And, I mentioned one of them before with Luis Garcia, but there were plenty more besides. And I think there's a lot of things to contend with when you move countries, and, language barriers, being away from your loved ones, changes the weather, a lot of people, I think struggle to deal with that in their normal lives, full stop, regardless of when you are a top level footballer expected to perform at the highest level with the pressure that comes with week in, week out club football. I think, everyone talks about that corner, don't they, with Iago Aspas? And, it was just so woeful, and it just kind of summed up his time there. Do you know who I think I would have expected to do slightly better is Lucas Perez? And he came from Deportivo and then eventually went back to Alaves. But in the meantime, he was at Arsenal, he was at West Ham. And I think at West Ham, I was thinking, maybe we're starting to get a sense of, what the Lucas Perez is, who's done so well, and he's not a young player. He's not a young player. He's in his late 20s now. But he's a great little player. And, when you see him now at Alaves, and we discussed this on La Liga Lowdown, and Andrew Miller wrote an article about it. Him, alongside Joselu up front, who would have thought it? 2 players who actually, didn't do much in England, and you put them together, and suddenly, actually, Joselucas, as we called them, works really well. So I think, it's partly to do with the football. I think sometimes, you don't necessarily get the style that you're used to, and some players find it hard to adapt and make it, Alvaro Morata actually started off really, really well, then just went, his light just dimmed. Costa managed it though. Diego Costa managed it, and maybe because he's a little bit more of that kind of physical force. So I think, it's a real mixed bag, and you've got some players who've managed it brilliantly over the years, over a sustained period of time. Think of Xabi Alonso, my goodness. For both your teams. For both of your teams, what an absolutely legendary player.
I adore that man.
It breaks my heart when he left. Broke my heart.
Yeah,
broke mine too.
but I think it just goes to show the intelligent footballers are the ones who learn how to find a different way of playing and who adapt their game and who evolve. And actually, if you think of Messi, has done that. He was, typically an Argentinian, what they call an enganche, a number 10. It's just that player off the striker, basically. But then or it's called a media punta in Spanish. It's kind of either the point, punta is the striker, media punta is the half point. So it's that little 10-year-old. But he went out to the wing, played as a false 9, and now basically he's a midfielder. He's basically a midfielder. And I remember he started doing that whilst, we were doing La Liga on Sky when I was presenting it. And I remember saying it. He's getting involved so much earlier in the moves. And actually, how many times have we seen him ping that ball out wide to Jordi Alba? So he has evolved with the game. And he is still as effective, if not even more so now. And he still racks up loads of goals. But doing it from a different position on the pitch. And I think that, yes, he's only played in one league and he's only played for one club. But, the players who manage to see a challenge and how they're changing and how a league is different to what they're used to, the ones who can adapt their game are the ones who do really thrive. So I think there are plenty of players, whether you're Spanish, English, German, wherever, who've gone through that experience, and some have mastered it and some have struggled.
Absolutely. You get a variation, don't you? Though I mean, even look at Mohamed Salah, for example. There's another one. Struggled in England initially. De Bruyne. There's so many.
Both at Chelsea. Chelsea must be there thinking, my
what
God,
have we done?
we had these two players at their peak, right? If we had these two players at their peak, then and then they signed two players who they hoped would be better, Torres and Shevchenko, and neither of those, despite what they'd previously achieved,
both were absolute duds in that same sense.
So it's very difficult. It's very difficult. But you're right. Sometimes, and maybe that's an age thing, Hass. I think but both of those players were a bit younger. Maybe didn't necessarily understand themselves. They maybe didn't understand the league. Maybe had different attitudes. Who knows?
Absolutely.
But then De Bruyne went to the Bundesliga, was absolutely
unbelievable. Unbelievable.
And then no doubt that and you can see why he's such a pet player, right? You can see why he is almost the perfect pet player, and he's that driving force. But he's got almost everything. Very, very unique player. But Chelsea never saw really any of that uniqueness. He looks like two completely different players.
It's quite terrifying, isn't it?
Yeah. So maybe it is just a maturity thing, and there might be a young Spanish player who comes over to the Premier League, maybe tempted by the wages, by the bright lights of the Premier League, who doesn't do well, goes away, comes back, and then masters it. But very few come back to the Premier League. Only a few do. I think once you're back in La Liga, that feels like a safe place, and a lot of them, are, as I mentioned, just like with Iago Aspas, with Costa, with Morata to a point, are performing again at a higher level back home.
Yeah, you get the opposite though, don't you? Sometimes, I mean, you got like David Silva, for example, went from being sort of that young star at Valencia, moved on to Manchester City, and he's become essentially like a Premier League legend. Like literally, I don't know many people who dislike David Silva.
No, Mata, I'd say the same. Mata,
another one.
Well, he both ex-Valencia, and I'm not just saying this; it's true. Jordi Alba is ex-Valencia. There's lots of others, but they managed to. I mean, Juan Mata, it looked like his career was over when Jose didn't want to play him, and then didn't seem to be a Jose player at Chelsea. Then went with Moyes to United, and has been dependable. Has been really dependable. You wouldn't want him outside your squad. I think he performs such a variety of roles, both on the pitch and off it. And also just genuinely one of the nicest people and one of the smartest people that there is in football as a footballer. I think, he's a phenomenon. He's a phenomenon. I think
absolutely,
once his playing career is over, I think there's plenty more to come from Juan Mata. I really sense that he's very, very, he's very, very switched on. So yeah, you're right. I think Silva and Mata, they're the ones who stood the test of time and become, both of them, I'd say, Premier League legends.
Yeah, definitely.
One final question for me, David, is if you could go back, and this is a very generic question, if you could go back at any time in your career and change one thing,
Oh, do you know what? This is unfortunately it's a non-football answer, I was so it's 2008, and I was at Silverstone watching Lewis Hamilton win the wet by about a minute. He was brilliant. He was, majestic in the way that he won that race. But on the same day, Roger Federer was playing Rafael Nadal in the Wimbledon final, in arguably the best final ever played, along with Borg McEnroe in '80. And what happened was in that time, I was at Radio 1 and I would cover Wimbledon until the second Thursday. So basically, all the quarterfinals were done. And I would jump out of Wimbledon then, and I'd go to Silverstone for Friday, Saturday, Sunday, practice qualifying in the race. So I was living the life of Riley. It was brilliant. I was, covering all these amazing sporting events, one after the other, bit of cricket, bit of tennis, bit of F1, whatever. It's obviously whilst the football season's, down for the summer. And I remember watching the race, and then they were showing the Wimbledon final on the big screens, because the race started at 1. Wimbledon, I think, started at 2. And so the race finished at around 3, and the final continued. They showed it on the big screens. And I was there watching it, and I watched, I think up till the 4th set. And then I listened to the 5th set on 5 Live as I was driving back home, because I was aware that actually the light was fading on centre court. And if this went into a Monday, I might be needed. But I think actually the guy who was covering it would probably just have carried on. But I was just prepared for the eventuality. So I listened to it on the way home, and it was spellbinding. It was incredible, drama on the radio. And I remember thinking, if there was one day in my life that I could clone myself, it would be this day. And, I could be at both places at the same time, although that is really greedy, and I appreciate it. And it all been set up. And the ironic thing is, the guy who covered it, the Wimbledon final, was a guy called Greg Dawson. Greg is a news reporter, Radio 1. He's been there for a long time. He's, very, very experienced. But this, I think, was one of the first tennis matches he'd watched, let alone reported on. The Wimbledon final of 2008 between Rafa Nadal and Roger Federer, 9-7 in the 5th to Nadal. And, the light fading on centre court, the most incredible final, level up here all the way through. And it's probably one of the first matches he's ever seen. And I'm saying, listen, just don't ever watch tennis again. It will never, ever get better than this. In fact, don't watch sport, because it will never get better than So that's probably, just from a personal point of view, the one thing that I wish I'd, been able to do was clone myself. But it's obviously that's not within the realms of my powers. But in terms of things that I'd change, no, not really. I think that, the mistakes that you make for a reason, and, they lead you down a different path, and then, you go a different way, and maybe, actually you go, well, I was glad that happened, or whatever. I think I've, up to this point, if someone had said to me when I was 18, 19, right, you're going to be, when you're 39, you're going to have done this, 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 and this. And this is what your careers look like. I would have obviously snapped their arm off, because I think I've been really fortunate to have that. I think, as I mentioned before, the breadth of events that I've covered, the people that I've spoken to, the projects that I've done have been amazing. And, they've all just sort of happened because of the path that I took. And it's just my path. And there are lots of different paths. And I'm sure that other people can take different paths and have an equally as fulfilling, or if not more fulfilling, journey than I've had. And I think that it's one of the best things about sport is when I speak to people and they're talking to me about career stuff, I just say, well, what is it that you're really passionate about? What gets you really elated? What gets you really angry? Because the likelihood is, if you do something to do with that, you're probably going to be fulfilled in your life. And I think sport does that for a lot of us. I think that's what's so special about it. You can feel the whole gamut of emotions from, winning the title to being relegated, to surviving relegation, to missing out on the title. You think of those poor Manchester United fans back in 2012 with Aguero. You think of
brings a smile to my face.
Yeah, well, I'm not surprised. But you think also of that immense relief you feel when you avoid relegation. It's almost as good as winning something. That's how much it means. And I think that sport is one of the only things in life that can do that to you. And if you have a job that's related to that, I think it's one of the best things in the world. So I would just endorse it heavily and go, listen, guys, if you want to get into this thing, do it, work hard, make your mistakes, recover from them, keep painting the landscape, keep assessing where you are and where you're going and whether it's the right thing. Be smart about it. and you'll get there, and you'll really enjoy it every single step.
I was going to say, you answered my final question within the Chris's question. I was going to say, if you were to advise a sort of younger self or younger people now breaking into the industry, what would you tell them? So yeah, you've answered that pretty much.
Yeah, but I mean, pretty much. I wouldn't add too much. I think, you know, I think I wouldn't want to kind of overcomplicate it, but it goes back to what I said before about, you know, the smart way of approaching the industry.
Yeah.
Think about it as skills led. Think about it as a savvy plan, as a smart plan, because look at it. It's a big industry with lots of opportunities, but lots of competition. There's more and more people who are coming out with qualifications, with all sorts of different things. They're doing lots of publishing on different outlets and platforms, and you know, it's harder and harder. But if you can think of a smart and savvy way of doing it, and you stick to that strategy, then I think, you know, you're gonna have a chance at least. And above all, my goodness, enjoy it. I think, you know, you can put a lot of pressure on yourself as young people, and I know I did. I think, you know, I was my own harshest critic, and I think that's great. And I think that, you know, I was a perfectionist, and I think that gets you to a certain point. But don't let that detract from the actual enjoyment of what you're doing. You know, you went to Wolves Espanyol. I'm sure it's just one of many, many, many football and media experiences you're going to have in your career. You know, Chris, you came to Sky, and hopefully that proves, you know, to be I suppose a little inspiration as to what you could possibly achieve, where you could be in future. And you've got to enjoy these things. You know, yes, of course, you want to do well, and there's pressure involved in that, but make sure you enjoy it, because otherwise there's just no point. You know, this is what sport is. Sport is, you know, 22 guys kicking a ball around, or 22 girls kicking a ball around. And you've got to just enjoy what it is that makes that one of the best spectacles that mankind, you know, that humankind's ever created. So I think that, you know, that's important to say too. There's a lot of focus on, you know, mental health and things like that, which is right. Just make sure that you smell the roses, because there's a lot of roses out there. And I think it's one of the most satisfying and fulfilling industries to be in. So enjoy the whole journey.
Definitely. Absolutely.
That's a good link, because it is retrospective my journey.
Yeah.
So there we go.
There you go. Perfect ending.
Always on brand, always on message.
Outro us out, Hasso. That's what we do.
No, yeah, what an episode! I've learned a hell of a lot there, and I've heard David speak about his career before on podcasts, but I feel I've learned even more from you there. So as always, I appreciate that, David, and we appreciate you telling us, you know, all the little sort of nuggets and things that you've learned along the way. So thank you for that. We really appreciate that.
Yeah.
No worries, guys. And I'll enjoy watching the rest of the series of Retrospective. I'm sure it'll be a great watch, and keep up all the good work.
Thank you very much, David.
Thank you.
And for our audience at home, we're trying to hit 200 subscribers by my 18th birthday. Will it happen? We will see. Anyway, it's going well. As well as there will be new episodes of Saving Saints and some tier lists with Haas, which is always good fun, isn't it, mate?
Always a good laugh, tier lists, because you're always going to annoy somebody.
Anyway, that is enough from us, and we will see you next time.